Welcome to Successful Philanthropy. I'm your host, Jean Shafiroff. This show is designed to highlight the work of leaders here in the United States and then beyond. Today, joining us from Puerto Rico is Veronica Colon Rosario, and Veronica is the Chief Executive Officer of the Puerto Rico Women's Foundation. Let's all welcome Veronica. And Veronica, it is just a great pleasure to have you on Successful Philanthropy. And I want to first start by asking you, what is the Puerto Rican Women's Foundation?
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me into this space. The Puerto Rico Women's Foundation is a women's fund and is the first and only philanthropic organization in this island working towards sending and giving resources to women-led organizations in Puerto Rico. We are an organization that was founded by Puerto Rican women in the diaspora, particularly New York, after the aftermath of Hurricane Maria 5 years ago. They wanted to open a fund to help just women because women are particularly vulnerable to climate disasters. So they had a conversation with Ana Oliveira from the New York Women's Foundation and decided that it would be really beneficial for the Puerto Rican women to have their own fund, because right now, before our existence, there was nothing dedicated to just women in Puerto Rico. So we are a fund that helps women, girls, and the non-binary community here in Puerto Rico, and we focus on the areas of gender and racial justice, and we also have a program on climate change and food security.
Yes, now, I don't want to interrupt you, but what are the problems that the Puerto Rican women face? Are they different from the problems that women face in the United States?
Not typically. We do face the similar problems in terms of gender equity, like equal salary. The wage gap here in Puerto Rico is very significant. And actually, as you have a higher degree, the wage gap increases. So if you have a bachelor degree, the wage gap of women between women and men in Puerto Rico is about $2,000. If you have a PhD, it's about $10,000. But the particular situation of women in Puerto Rico is that we have really high incidence of gender-based violence, being so bad that the governor declared a state of emergency last year and renew it this year because things haven't gotten better. And other than that, we have one of the highest rates of people living under the poverty line, and the great majority of those people are single moms and women in the center and west side of the island.
Yes, now you mentioned gender-based violence, and are you talking about domestic violence, or what exactly are you referring to?
Yes, when I say gender-based, I put it general because we also work with the non-binary community, but it's definitely domestic violence.
And is this a very big problem in Puerto Rico?
Yes, most definitely, to the point that the governor declared a state of emergency. We've had several initiatives in Puerto Rico and funding for organizations and women's shelters. Not only the problem is serious in terms of numbers, but also we have very few resources for women who are victims of gender-based violence. And because of state and federal funds towards those communities have been reduced dramatically.
Yes, and I once served on a domestic violence committee for 2 years of a charity that I was very involved with called the Jewish Board, which is a very, very large social service charity in New York. I myself am a Catholic, but I love the work of this charity so much that I got involved and served on their board for 28 years. And what we found was that education is vitally important. You have to get to the young children and re-educate them, because domestic violence is generational, meaning that generation after generation, if there was domestic violence in one family, generally the next generation will also have domestic violence. So we were involved in working with actually the abusers to retrain them, and then also to encourage important educational symposiums and other types of work. And then in the lower schools as well, to teach children that it's wrong. And hopefully that's happening in Puerto Rico as well. Re-education of people, not that they're educated to do this, because they're certainly not, but just to teach the children that it's very important not to get involved in domestic violence, and what they may be seeing is wrong.
I really love that you bring up this question, and that's why you see me smiling, because it is an effort that we've been trying to do for many years in Puerto Rico. We have a group, after the governor declared the state of emergency, he created this group called PARE, P-A-R-E, which means stop in English. But is a group that was in charge of creating legislation or bringing ideas to the legislator to propose ideas to reduce gender-based violence, domestic violence, violence against women. And one of them was to create a curriculum for schools with a gender perspective, to give children the education of what it means, and the gender roles, and what it means to be violent, and have that education since childhood. Just exactly as you say, it's very important. Unfortunately, there was some people in the legislature that were opposed to it, because there was a lot of misunderstanding of what this is, and they stopped the program from continuing. But we keep fighting to have a gender perspective curriculum in schools. And while we do that on the side, our foundation is funding community organizations to teach children about the dangers of domestic violence, and having them be aware of what are the causes of this in the family. And there is a lot of beautiful work that is being done in the community organizations. But yes, it's just as you say, it starts from childhood.
And I love what you're doing to try to help combat domestic and gender violence. Now, you are a small organization. Before this interview, you mentioned to me that the organization, the Puerto Rico Women's Foundation, was founded 2 years ago. And I understand you're getting funding from an important group in New York Women's Foundation. I serve on the board of this charity. What are some of the needs in terms of financing that you have? You have the domestic violence issue, but what other programs are you involved in that need funding?
Yes, we the New York Women's Foundation gave us our first seed capital to start. So we like to say we're one of their daughters, and they are our madrinas, which is our godmother name in Spanish. And we owe a lot to Ana Oliveira and the New York Women's Foundation. So we will forever be grateful. And they are our mentors. So everything that we do has been a learning experience from having them in our growth. But in terms of needs, we have been working with victims of domestic violence, but we also have a lot of problems with women economic empowerment. And right now we launched a program for women in agriculture, because it's a job that is particularly dominated by men, but we're seeing a resurgence of women in agriculture, particularly with small scale farming, and it's their source of income. So we're working with women to empower them and give them the resources that they need to grow these businesses and start to sell their crops. And And we work with two associations, one on the East Coast and one on the West Coast of Puerto Rico. And they're all women farmers, small scale. And it's a beautiful project because farming needs big investment, and small women farmers typically don't have the infrastructure to get government funding. So what we do is we work with them and we do capacity building, we connect them with other funders so they can build their infrastructure and eventually get government funding to support their business and build sustainable organizations. And we do the same with other organizations around the island. Anybody that gives services to women and girls to provide them safety, education, and even food security, we have the same model. We choose organizations that typically don't get funding, organizations that are often forgotten because of their geographical location. And that means that they're in the center of the island, or on the West Coast, or the island municipalities of Vieques and Culebra that are geographically detached from Puerto Rico. And because it's so hard to access them, people often forget that they need help. So we focus on them, we give them the resources, we give them the funding, we give them operational flexible funding, and we also work alongside with them every day to see how else we can help them. We do training on finance management, fundraising, institutional strengthening, everything that they need to build a strong institution.
All very important work. And if you had a wish list, you have a lot of big businesses in Puerto Rico that perhaps will get involved with your organization, the Puerto Rico Women's Foundation, because if I had a business and I were based in Puerto Rico and I saw that there was tremendous need, there was a gender bias in terms of pay equity, there is no pay equity, and then women just struggling with domestic violence and other issues, and then hearing the situation of women working on farms. Well, if I had a business and I was in Puerto Rico, I would want to give to your organization. I would want to give to your organization anyway. And so talk about a wish list for your charity.
I really wish for champions. I need champions to support my organization, people who believe in our mission and want to see Puerto Rico succeed in this area. It's a very important, something I missed to say in the beginning. Women typically are the women's organizations get less funding, get less funding in general, and that's not a problem of Puerto Rico. That's a problem, as you know, worldwide. But in Puerto Rico, and I don't know anywhere else, but in Puerto Rico, they're the first ones to respond to any crisis or any situation, and they're the ones who are at the community, and the level of expertise that women have of their communities, is incredible. So when you support a women's organization, that work expands and impacts their families, and then they expand to their communities. So I'm a firm believer that if we want effective social change, we have to start investing in our women. So in my wish list, I want champions who believe in that and who want to see me succeed. And eventually people who would walk along with me to make Puerto Rico a worldwide example of gender equity, because we can be a case study. It's a small island, 100 by 35 miles. It's very small, 3 million people. It's a 3 million people population. It's a very small place. So we can work on this and we can make a case, and we can study the situation here and use it as a model to replicate in other areas. So I need champions who can believe in that mission and give me the funding that I need so I can invest in women and see the change in Puerto Rico.
For our audience, we are with Veronica Colon Rosario, who is the executive director of the Puerto Rico Women's Foundation. She's now joining us live from Puerto Rico, and she's discussing the situation of women and how the many problems that women have in Puerto Rico concerning the lack of gender equity, domestic violence, and a whole multitude of different problems. Now, Veronica, how have all the hurricanes affected women in Puerto Rico? I would imagine that all the damage and destruction and the complete disruption of life because of the hurricanes has had a terrible effect on the lives of women. And I'm sure you probably agree.
I wholeheartedly agree with you. It has been, as we speak today, it has been 7 days since we saw our last hurricane. Hurricane Fiona was just a Category 1 hurricane, but because we're still recovering from Hurricane Maria 5 years ago, our infrastructure is very weak. So a Category 1 hurricane within a day achieved complete blackout. And I mean, 100% of people in Puerto Rico lost power. And that was a Category 1 hurricane. That tells you how vulnerable the situation in Puerto Rico is. And we are in a position geographically that makes us a perfect target for hurricanes. We're usually the second, third stop of a hurricane. And by the time they get to Puerto Rico, they're bigger and stronger. And as you probably know, women are very susceptible to issues of climate disasters because they are the sole providers of their households sometimes. They are seen as the main caretakers. So when a hurricane passes, not only they have to do their job, they have to take care of their children, they have to take care of their household. In our case this week, as we've seen after the passing of our last Hurricane Fiona, I have women taking mud out of their houses because their houses got flooded. We had so much rain that there was flooding all around Puerto Rico, and it was horrible. So we have seen an increase of calls and reports of domestic violence because the tension is high in the household. Imagine living in a place where you don't know if you're going to have food tomorrow because the supermarket is not accepting credit cards. You have to have cash to pay because there's no power anywhere. So they're operating with their generators, and the internet is weak. You don't have cash. You don't know if you're going to have food tomorrow. Tensions are growing in the household, and there ends up being an incidence of violence in the household because people are emotional, and sometimes people don't know how to express their feelings if it's not with violence. So we're seeing a high increase of cases of domestic violence here in Puerto Rico, and it's typically what happens after hurricanes. It happened in the beginning of COVID-19. It happened in the last hurricane 5 years ago. And it's a situation that we're trying to address with our grantees. But it just makes everything worse, the hurricane and climate disasters.
Yes. Now, for our audience who want to donate, this is a 501c3, the Puerto Rico Women's Foundation. So your donation will be tax deductible. Veronica, what is the website for the Puerto Rico Women's Foundation?
It's a very long name, and it's in Spanish. So I'll say it is www.fundacionmujerespuertorico. So it's Puerto Rico Women's Foundation in Spanish, .org. Again, it's Fundación Mujeres Puerto Rico. It's all together, and it's Puerto Rico, written Puerto Rico, not PR like typically people write. .org. Or you can do a Google search, Puerto Rico Women's Foundation, and we're typically the first one to show up. And you can find us on social media as Puerto Rico Women's Foundation, and we'll show up. Our logo is very easy to recognize. It's the Puerto Rican flag with the women icon with the star in the middle. So it's very easy to identify.
Yes, and what I did was I just Googled Puerto Rico Women's Foundation, and you came right up. And I did notice a donate button. And of course, I'm going to do what I can, but I also love to give through New York Women's Foundation. And I think your work is very, very important. And I understand you have a very small budget, so the money that people give goes a long way, correct?
Definitely. We're small still. We are only 2 years old. It's not going to be the case in the future. I need a big budget to really create effective change. I really want to be that funder for women that gives right and gives 3-year grants, 3-year significant grants, so they can grow stronger and don't depend on me, and they can find their own grants in the future and they can sustain themselves. So I really want to be that funder for those organizations.
Now, what about volunteers? Most charities are very grateful to have volunteers. Do you have volunteer opportunities for the women and men in Puerto Rico who might want to um, just help out?
Yes, we have some volunteers that come and do work with marketing. We have marketing volunteers who work our social media. We have people who volunteer to do fundraising for us, and that's wonderful because we're small staff. We're only 3 people. I am the one who does the fundraising with my co-chair, so it's a lot of work for us. And because we are a community foundation, we don't necessarily have the ties that some foundations have when they start. Family foundations are very different from community foundations, from other type of foundations. And in our case, we're starting from the ground. So it will take a lot of investment for us to grow. So people that volunteer to do that are always appreciated. And those are the only volunteers we've had so far. Right now, the list of volunteers I have, I am dispatching with other my grantees so they can help them distribute food and water to the communities. So everybody that is here gets a role if they're a volunteer for the foundation.
And have you done any parties or any fundraising events so far, or are you planning maybe to do something in the future?
We haven't done our first fundraiser because we're waiting to have better brand awareness of the foundation. We want people to get to know us first and do great work so we can showcase it. But we are definitely doing cultivation events in New York. We're trying to find people who are willing to do this for us. And we have done a few cultivation events in Puerto Rico.
Nice. And I think it's very important to get the word out. I'm assuming you're doing the best you can to market your brand, which is the Puerto Rico Women's Foundation, correct?
Yes, we are. We have if you Google Puerto Rico Women's Foundation, and if we're the first one to show up, that shows that we're paying attention of what we put at the website. So we are easily find on Google. And we're also I have one staff that is completely dedicated to our social media and build our social media presence.
I think it's very, very important what you're doing, and I think that you will be very successful. And for our audience, I like to bring on different people. And this is a case of a woman who has gotten involved with the Puerto Rico Women's Foundation a few years ago. She's the executive director, Veronica Rosario. And we're hearing what it's like to be a young charity, a new charity in a place where there are many, many different problems. And unfortunately, Puerto Rico, because of the hurricanes and because of a host of other problems, truly needs our help, and the women especially need the help. And as Veronica said earlier, when you empower a woman, you empower a family, you empower a community, and then you empower the world. And these words we've heard around the world many, many times. They're true words and they're important words. Veronica, we're just about running out of time. What would you like to leave our audience with?
I would want to invite you to visit us on our website and get to know more about us. I'm always happy to talk to people about the work that we're doing, and always welcome to come here and I'll show you a direct work that we're doing. But I do want people to take the message that we are in a time where people and studies have shown that it will take more than 100 years to achieve gender equity. And in order to catch up and do that, we need to invest and invest right in our communities. So I want people to take the message that when you invest, think about it with a gender lens and think about investing in women, because it's going to have a big impact and it's going to move us forward in achieving the goal of gender equity.
Well, thank you, Veronica. You've been a wonderful guest, and I think we've all learned a little bit more about Puerto Rico, the women of Puerto Rico, and unfortunately, the problems they face. And those problems are quite severe, not only because of all the hurricanes, but because of primarily, I think, the financial issues and domestic violence also being a big problem. This concludes Successful Philanthropy. Our guest today, Veronica Colon Rosario. And Veronica is the Executive Director of the Puerto Rico Women's Foundation. I'm Jean Shafiroff, your host. I'll see you next week.